The first sentence of the book that would change everything read, "He walked into my cafe on a Tuesday, ordered black coffee, and made me forget every word I had ever written." Those 17 words had taken Elliot James 6 months to write. 6 months of staring at blank pages, of crumpling drafts and throwing them away, of wondering if he would ever be able to write again after the failure of his first novel. He was 26 years old, living in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner in Brooklyn, working as a barista to pay rent while trying desperately to prove that his literary dreams weren't as foolish as everyone seemed to think. And then he had met Alexander Pierce, and those 17 words had finally come. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how a struggling young writer and a legendary 61-year-old novelist found each other, to understand the scandal, the passion, the art they would create together, you need to know how empty their lives were before they collided. Elliot James had published his first novel at 23, a semi-autobiographical story about growing up gay in a small town in Indiana. The critics had been kind, calling it promising and authentic, but the book had sold fewer than 3,000 copies. His publisher had declined to offer him a second contract. His agent had stopped returning his calls. And Elliot had been left to wonder if his entire life's purpose, writing, was just a childish fantasy he should have outgrown years ago. He had moved to New York because that's what writers were supposed to do. He had taken the barista job because he needed to eat. He had filled notebooks with false starts and abandoned ideas, each one feeling more hollow than the last. At 26, Elliot felt like a failure, a has-been before he had ever really begun. His love life was equally barren. A string of relationships that never lasted more than a few months, always ending the same way, with his partner complaining that Elliot was too distant, too consumed by his work, too unwilling to let anyone really know him. He had started to believe they were right. That there was something broken inside him, some inability to connect that would leave him alone forever. He had stopped hoping for love. He had almost stopped hoping for anything. And then Alexander Pierce walked into the cafe. Alexander Pierce was a living legend. At 61, he had published 12 novels, won the National Book Award twice, been shortlisted for the Pulitzer 3 times. His face had graced the covers of literary magazines. His words had been quoted by presidents and professors alike. He was the kind of writer that young writers like Elliot dreamed of becoming, successful, respected, immortal through his art. But what the public didn't know, what Alexander himself barely admitted, was that behind the acclaim and the accolades, he was desperately, profoundly lonely. His partner of 20 years, a poet named Michael, had died of cancer 5 years ago. Since then, Alexander had retreated from the world, isolating himself in his Manhattan brownstone, going weeks without speaking to anyone beyond his housekeeper and his editor. He still wrote, writing was the only thing that felt real anymore, but even his words had started to feel hollow, echoes of a talent that might be fading. He had come to the cafe that Tuesday because he couldn't bear another day of staring at the walls of his home, where Michael's absence was felt in every empty chair and silent room. He had ordered black coffee because that was what Michael had always ordered, and habit was sometimes the only thing that kept him moving forward. He hadn't expected to look up and see a young man behind the counter with eyes the color of sea glass and an expression of such desperate hope that it made Alexander's chest ache. "Black coffee," Elliot had said, setting the cup down with hands that trembled slightly, because he had recognized Alexander immediately, because he had read every single one of his books, because he was standing face to face with his literary hero and trying not to completely fall apart. "Thank you," Alexander had said. And then, because he had noticed the worn notebook sticking out of Elliot's apron pocket, because he had recognized that desperate hope from his own young face decades ago, "Are you a writer?" Elliot had laughed, a hollow sound. "I'm trying to be. But I'm starting to think I should give up." Something shifted in Alexander's eyes then. Something that looked like recognition, or memory, or pain. "Don't," he said simply. And then, surprising them both, "What are you working on? Would you tell me about it?" Elliot had told him. Right there, across the counter, during a brief lull in customers. He had told Alexander about the novel he couldn't seem to finish, about the characters who felt flat, about the story that had so much potential but refused to come to life on the page. Alexander had listened with an intensity that made Elliot feel, for the first time in months, like his words mattered. Like he mattered. "Would you want to get coffee sometime?" Alexander had asked when Elliot's manager started giving them pointed looks. "Not here. Somewhere we can actually talk. I'd like to hear more about your book." Elliot's heart had been pounding so loud he was surprised the entire cafe couldn't hear it. Yes. I would like that very much." They met 2 days later at a quiet cafe in the village. That conversation lasted 4 hours. They talked about writing, about craft, about the terror of the blank page and the ecstasy of finding the perfect word. Alexander offered feedback on the opening chapters Elliot had hesitantly shared, and his insights were so precise, so valuable, that Elliot wanted to cry. For the first time in months, he felt like a real writer again. They met again the following week. And the week after that. What had started as mentorship became friendship, and what had started as friendship became something neither of them had expected. Elliot wasn't sure when he had started falling in love. Maybe it was the way Alexander laughed at his jokes, a rusty sound that suggested he hadn't laughed in a long time. Maybe it was the way Alexander looked at him when he read his writing, with such genuine admiration that Elliot almost believed he might be good after all. Maybe it was the vulnerability Alexander showed late one night, when he had told Elliot about Michael, about the years of grief, about the loneliness that had consumed him. "I never thought I would feel anything again," Alexander had confessed, his voice rough. "After Michael died, I thought that part of me had died too. The part that was capable of connection. Of love." Elliot had reached across the table and taken his hand. "You're still here. That part of you is still here." Alexander had looked at their joined hands for a long moment. And when he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. "Elliot," he said. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand that I won't think less of you if you run away after I say it." Elliot's heart was pounding. "Tell me. I'm developing feelings for you. Feelings that go beyond friendship, beyond mentorship. And I know it's inappropriate. I'm 35 years older than you, I'm established in the same industry where you're trying to make your name, people would say terrible things about both of us. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." Elliot was quiet for a moment. And then, slowly, he smiled. "I've been in love with you for weeks," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it." Alexander stared at him. "You, what?" "I love you," Elliot repeated. "I love how your mind works. I love the way you see the world. I love that you make me feel like my words matter, like I matter. I love that you're brave enough to be vulnerable with me even though you've been hurt so badly. I don't care about the age difference. I don't care what people say. I care about you." Alexander brought Elliot's hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss against his fingers. "You understand what you'd be signing up for," he said softly. "I'm 61. I'm set in my ways. I'm still grieving a man I loved for 2 decades. I come with baggage that most people your age couldn't even imagine. And I'm a failed writer with no money who lives above a dry cleaner," Elliot replied. "I come with my own baggage. I think maybe that's what relationships are, two people with baggage deciding to carry it together." Alexander laughed then, really laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. "You're remarkable," he said. "Has anyone ever told you that?" Elliot shook his head. "Not really, no." "Then everyone you've ever known is a fool." Alexander squeezed his hand. "I don't know where this is going. I don't know if we're making a terrible mistake. But I'd like to find out. With you." Their relationship was a secret at first, by necessity. Alexander was too prominent, and their connection too unusual, to subject to immediate public scrutiny. They needed time to figure out what they were before the world started having opinions about it. Those early months were the most creatively productive of Elliot's life. Inspired by his feelings for Alexander, guided by Alexander's mentorship, he finally finished his second novel. It was different from anything he had written before, deeper, more complex, more honest. It was a love story, in some ways, though not explicitly autobiographical. It was about two people finding each other after giving up hope, about the way art and love could intertwine, about the courage it took to open yourself to another person. Alexander was the first person to read the finished manuscript. He read it in one sitting, unable to put it down, and when he finished, there were tears on his cheeks. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Eliot, this is the book you were always meant to write. This is going to change your career." He was right. Alexander connected Eliot with his own agent, a connection that was professionally appropriate, as the agent later said, since she represented all kinds of writers and evaluated manuscripts on merit alone. The agent loved the book. Within weeks, a major publisher had made an offer. Within a year, the book was on bestseller lists. The Spaces Between Us, by Elliot James was called a masterpiece of emotional precision by the New York Times. Critics who had dismissed his first novel as merely promising now hailed him as a major new voice. The comparison to Alexander Pierce's early work was inevitable, and initially made Eliot uncomfortable, until Alexander pointed out that being compared to one of the best writers in the country was hardly an insult. When the book was nominated for the National Book Award, Eliot and Alexander decided it was time to stop hiding. They went public in an interview with a literary magazine, speaking candidly about their relationship, their age difference, their mutual respect and love. The reactions were mixed, as they had expected. Some people were supportive. Others questioned whether Alexander had used his influence to advance Eliot's career, whether the relationship was truly equal, whether there was something predatory about a 61-year-old man dating someone 35 years younger. Alexander addressed these concerns directly. "I fell in love with Eliot's mind before I fell in love with him as a person. His talent is entirely his own, he was already an exceptional writer when we met, even if the world hadn't recognized it yet. Our relationship didn't create his success, his own genius did. I'm simply lucky enough to witness it up close." Eliot was equally direct. "I understand why people have questions. The power imbalance in our industry is real, and should be taken seriously. But Alexander has only ever been my champion, never my gatekeeper. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He taught me to trust my own voice. And yes, he loved me. But he loved me in a way that made me stronger, not dependent." The literary world, after initial skepticism, largely accepted their relationship. Perhaps because their mutual respect was so obvious. Perhaps because Eliot's success was so clearly earned. Perhaps because love, when it's genuine, has a way of convincing even the most cynical observers. 3 years after they met, they moved in together, into Alexander's brownstone, which no longer felt empty now that Eliot was there to fill it with his chaotic notebooks, his terrible habit of leaving coffee cups everywhere, his bright laughter that echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. Alexander wrote again, truly wrote, for the first time since Michael's death. His 13th novel was dedicated to Eliot, with an inscription that became famous in literary circles, "To E.J., who taught me that love can be found more than once, and that second chances are not consolation prizes but gifts." Eliot continued to write too, producing a third novel, then a fourth, building a career that was his own even as his life was intertwined with Alexander's. They collaborated sometimes, trading pages, offering feedback, arguing about word choices with an intensity that usually ended in laughter. On their 5th anniversary, Alexander gave Eliot a gift, a first edition of Eliot's first novel, the one that had sold only 3,000 copies, the one that had made him feel like a failure. "I found this in a used bookstore last year," Alexander said. "I've been saving it for today. Do you know why?" Eliot shook his head, tears already forming. "Because this book," Alexander said, holding it up, "is where you started. Not where you ended. You looked at this book's failure and you decided to keep going anyway. You decided to keep writing, keep hoping, keep believing you had something worth saying. And because you did, because you refused to give up, you walked into a cafe in Brooklyn one Tuesday afternoon, and you changed my life." He set the book down and took Elliot's hands in his own. "I was ready to die alone," Alexander continued, his voice rough. "I had accepted it. I had made peace with it. And then there you were, with your sea-glass eyes and your desperate hope and your worn notebook sticking out of your apron. And I thought, maybe I'm not done yet. Maybe there's still a chapter left to write." He kissed Elliot softly. "You're my chapter, Elliot. You're my whole story now." Elliot was crying openly now, holding on to Alexander like he might disappear. "I love you," he said. "I love you more than I know how to put into words, and I'm a writer, and that's supposed to be the thing I'm good at, but when it comes to you, all my language fails me." "Then don't use words," Alexander murmured against his lips. "Just stay. That's all I need. Just stay. Always," Elliot promised. Always. Today, Elliot is 31 and Alexander is 66. They've weathered health scares and public criticism and the everyday challenges of building a life together. Alexander has slowed down, writing less but still writing, still finding joy in the craft that has defined his life. Elliot has become an established author in his own right, mentoring young writers the way Alexander once mentored him, paying forward the gift he was given. They talk sometimes about the future, about the reality that Alexander will likely die before Elliot, that their time together is finite in ways that younger couples don't have to consider. These conversations are hard, but they have them anyway, because avoiding pain has never been their approach to life. "I used to be afraid of losing you," Elliot admitted recently. "I used to think about it constantly, worry about it, dread it. But then I realized, I had a choice. I could spend our time together worrying about it ending, or I could spend it loving you as fiercely as I know how. I chose the second option." Alexander smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening in a way that Elliot had come to love. "That's the only choice that makes sense," he agreed. "We don't get to control how long we have. We only get to control what we do with it. What they've done with it is build a love story that has inspired thousands of people. Their relationship has become a symbol of something larger, of the possibility of finding love at any age, of the way connection can transcend differences, of the courage it takes to let yourself be vulnerable even when you've been hurt." Letters arrive at Alexander's brownstone regularly, from young gay writers who saw their story and felt less alone, from older men who thought their chance for love had passed, from anyone who had ever believed that the world's narrow definitions of who should love whom were the final word. They read every letter. Sometimes they respond. Always they remember how it felt to be alone, and how miraculous it is to be found. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that love doesn't follow rules, that creativity can flourish in connection, that it's never too late to write a new chapter, I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over yet. And remember, the blank page can be terrifying. But it's also possibility. Your next chapter could be your best one. All you have to do is be brave enough to write it.